The ticking of the clock on the wall was the only sound in the conference room before the will reading began. The polished mahogany table stretched the length of the room, its surface gleaming under the muted sunlight seeping through the blinds. I sat at the far end, hands clasped tightly in my lap, trying to mask the tremor in my fingers. Across from me, strangers and half-strangers, people who had hardly been part of Daniel's life, shifted in their chairs, waiting for the lawyer to speak. I had expected grief to weigh down this day. Instead, it was suspicion. The attorney, Mr. Turner, adjusted his glasses with a measured motion. His legal pad lay open, the will neatly stacked beside it. His throat cleared, and the sound echoed louder than it should have in the heavy silence. For a fleeting moment, his eyes darted toward me, almost apologetic, and then he began to read. The opening was formal, impersonal, filled with Daniel's name, dates, and legal jargon. I sat frozen, staring at the papers as though I could see Daniel's handwriting hidden beneath the typed lines. Then the words shifted, moving to the division of assets. My pulse quickened. This was the moment I had been dreading but also needing, to hear what Daniel had left for me, his wife of nearly 2 decades. The words landed like a blow. To my beloved wife, Emma Carter, I leave. A pause. Mr. Turner's eyes flickered up, then down again. Nothing. Air seemed to drain from the room. I blinked hard, thinking I had misheard. But his voice pressed forward, steady and unyielding. The entirety of the estate, including financial accounts, properties, and shares, shall be transferred to James Carter. James. Daniel's estranged brother. I turned my head slowly, as though moving too quickly would shatter the fragile reality I was clinging to. James leaned back in his chair, arms folded, the corner of his mouth twitching into a smile that barely hid his satisfaction. He had been absent from Daniel's life for years, reappearing only in scattered mentions, yet here he sat, basking in my devastation. The lawyer continued, citing the date of the amendment, just 2 weeks before Daniel's death. 2 weeks. At that time Daniel had been heavily medicated, barely lucid, struggling to recognize faces. My hands curled into fists against my lap. How could he have been capable of making such a decision then? Rachel, Daniel's sister, reached across the table and touched my arm lightly. Her face was pale, her lips parted as if she wanted to object but couldn't form the words. The pity in her eyes was unbearable. I didn't want pity. I wanted the truth. When the reading ended, chairs scraped against the floor as people stood quickly, avoiding my gaze. Polite condolences were muttered in hushed tones, meaningless words that felt rehearsed. James lingered by the doorway. He looked at me with the cold detachment of someone who had already won. "Business is business, Emma," he said, his voice low, almost mocking. Then he left, his footsteps echoing until the door closed behind him. I stayed seated long after everyone had gone. Mr. Turner gathered his papers, his hands careful, deliberate. When he slid the copy of the will across the table to me, I caught something in his expression, a hesitation, a flicker of guilt. It was gone in an instant, replaced by professional detachment, but I saw it. Back at home, I spread the will across the kitchen table. The house was quiet, too quiet. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed distant. I ran my fingers along the pages, tracing the printed lines as if I might feel Daniel's voice hiding beneath them. That was when I noticed it. On the second page, faint indentations marred the surface, shallow grooves pressed into the paper as if a sheet had once been laid over it and written upon. The patterns didn't match the printed text. They were hand-drawn, uneven, unmistakably human. I leaned closer, holding the page under the kitchen light, angling it until the marks revealed themselves. Words. Not clear, not complete, but there. It was as if a ghost of Daniel's handwriting had been pressed into the will, only to vanish with the page that carried it. My chest tightened. Why would a page be missing? And why had Turner looked so uneasy as he read Daniel's final words? The silence of the house pressed against me, heavy and suffocating. I sat back, the document trembling slightly in my hands. Somewhere, hidden from me, was another version of Daniel's will. One that had been altered, or stolen. I whispered to the empty room, What did you really leave me, Daniel? And why had someone worked so hard to make sure I'd never see it? Morning light spilled weakly through the blinds, but the house still felt dim. I hadn't slept. The copy of the will lay open on the kitchen table, the faint indentations on the page gnawing at me like a half-heard whisper. I knew I wasn't imagining it. There had been another sheet pressed against this one, and someone had made sure I wouldn't have it in my hands. By noon, I was back at Turner and Amp, Associates, the law firm that had handled Daniel's estate. The receptionist's smile faltered when she saw me, probably recognizing the name from yesterday's tense reading. "Do you have an appointment, Mrs. Carter?" "I need to speak with Mr. Turner," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "It's important." Minutes later, I was ushered into his office. The blinds were drawn halfway, leaving lines of shadow slashed across the carpet. Turner sat behind his desk, his hands folded neatly, but his shoulders were tense. He motioned for me to sit. "I want to see the original will," I said without delay. "Not just the copy you handed out yesterday. The original." His eyes flickered, just as they had in the conference room. A pause, then, "Mrs. Carter, the copy you received is legally identical. It represents Daniel's wishes." "No," I cut in. My hand trembled slightly as I placed the paper on his desk and pointed at the indentation. "Look at this." Something was pressed into the page. A handwritten sheet, one that's missing. "Why?" Turner leaned back, pressing his lips together. He didn't touch the paper. His silence stretched until it became unbearable. Finally, he spoke, low and deliberate. "There was an earlier version of the will. But Daniel signed an amendment shortly before his death. That amendment superseded everything else. What you're seeing is residue from the previous draft." The way he avoided my eyes made my skin crawl. "And who delivered this amendment?" I asked. Turner hesitated again, his jaw tightening. "James Carter brought it to us. He said Daniel dictated the changes to him when he was too weak to write. He insisted on his presence as witness." My chest burned. Daniel could barely remember names by then. He couldn't have dictated legal changes. Turner sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. I had concerns. But James was adamant. He produced Daniel's shaky signature. Without proof otherwise, the amendment stood. I felt my nails dig into my palm. Proof otherwise. That was what I needed. When I left the office, the afternoon air hit me like a slap. James's words from yesterday echoed in my mind. Business is business. I couldn't shake the image of him standing at Daniel's bedside, whispering lies into his ear while he was too weak to resist. That night, I searched Daniel's study, a room I hadn't touched since his passing. Dust clung to the bookshelves, and the faint scent of his cologne still lingered on the leather chair. I pulled open drawers one by one, searching for anything that might explain the missing page. Receipts, old bank statements, scattered notes, nothing. Then, in the back of the bottom drawer, my fingers brushed against something rough wedged between the wood and the paneling. I tugged, and a folded, crumpled sheet slid out. The edges were torn, as though it had been ripped hastily from a binder. My breath caught. It was a draft of Daniel's will. In his own handwriting, though uneven and shaky, were the words, "All assets to my wife, Emma Carter." My knees weakened. Daniel hadn't cut me out. Someone else had. I pressed the page flat against the desk, my pulse hammering in my ears. The truth was buried here, hidden by hands that wanted me powerless. But I had the missing piece now. And if James had gone this far, what else was he hiding? The discovery of that torn page haunted me through the night. I kept unfolding and refolding it, tracing Daniel's unsteady handwriting until the letters blurred. He had wanted me to have everything. The betrayal wasn't his. It was James's. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I scheduled an appointment with an independent attorney, someone unconnected to Turner and Amp, Associates. Her name was Sophia Blake, sharp-eyed and calm, with the kind of steady presence that made you feel safe even when the ground beneath you was shifting. I slid the crumpled page across her desk. She studied it carefully, her brow furrowing. "This is significant," she said. "If we can prove the amendment was fraudulent, the court will restore the original will." Her words should have comforted me, but I couldn't ignore the tremor in her voice when she added, "But you need more than one sheet of paper. You'll need supporting evidence, medical records, handwriting analysis, anything that undermines the validity of the amendment." The fight wasn't going to be simple. I spent days combing through Daniel's belongings. Old notebooks, scraps of paper where he had written grocery lists or reminders. Every signature mattered now. Every stroke of his pen could expose James's forgery. My hands shook as I compared them against the shaky scrawl on the amendment Turner had shown me. They didn't match. Daniel's decline had been slow but never that extreme. One evening, as I sorted through files in the study, the phone rang. I hesitated before answering. James's voice slithered through the line. "Emma, I hear you've been digging. That's a mistake." I gripped the receiver tighter. "You forged his signature." A pause. Then a low chuckle. "Prove it." His tone shifted, darker. "Don't forget, courts aren't kind to widows without evidence. You'll waste your time and your money. Best to walk away." The line went dead. I stood frozen, the phone still pressed against my ear. His arrogance only confirmed my suspicion. James wasn't worried because he thought I couldn't win. But he had underestimated me. That night, I tucked Daniel's handwritten page into a folder with copies of his medical charts and past signatures. Piece by piece, I was building the proof Sophia had asked for. But one question still gnawed at me, keeping me awake. If James had been willing to forge Daniel's last wishes, what else had he done while Daniel was too weak to fight back? The courtroom felt colder than I expected. Rows of polished benches stretched behind me, but my focus stayed on the folder in front of me. Every page, every signature, every piece of proof I had gathered. Sophia sat beside me, her posture calm but alert. Across the aisle, James leaned back in his chair, smirking like a man who believed he had already won. When the judge entered, the room hushed. Sophia rose first, presenting the evidence with a precision that made my heart steady. She held up the crumpled draft of Daniel's will. This document, in the decedent's own handwriting, shows his original intent, to leave his estate to his wife, Emma Carter. The so-called amendment, introduced by James Carter, contradicts every previous record. James's attorney objected, but Sophia pressed on. She produced medical records showing Daniel's severe disorientation during the date of the amendment. Then, a handwriting expert testified, comparing Daniel's authentic signatures with the shaky scrawl on the amendment. The differences were undeniable. James shifted uncomfortably for the first time. His smirk faltered. When it was over, the judge's words rang clear. "The amendment is invalid. The estate will pass to Emma Carter, as per the original will." Relief washed over me, sharp and overwhelming. For the first time since Daniel's death, I felt seen, vindicated. I had defended not just my rights, but his true intentions. Outside the courthouse, the sun was bright, the city noisy with life. I stepped onto the sidewalk, breathing in air that finally felt clean. James appeared behind me, his eyes hard. "You think this is over?" he muttered. "It's only round one." But his threat no longer shook me. I met his stare, calm, unflinching. "I'm not afraid of you anymore." I turned and walked away, the sound of my footsteps strong against the pavement. Daniel's will was restored, but more than that, I had reclaimed myself. And if James ever came back, I would be ready.